My name is Teresa Langley, and I'm 67 years old. For the past 3 decades, I've worked as a caregiver in a small hospice clinic in Southern Oregon. I help people through their final chapters, most of them alone. It's not glamorous, but it's sacred in its own quiet way. You'd be surprised how often the last thing someone wants before they pass is simply to have their hand held. I suppose I've spent most of my life being that hand. And when you live like that long enough, always useful, always gentle, always behind the curtain, you start to forget what it feels like to be seen until someone reminds you, violently. The night before my son's wedding, I stood in a parking lot with a hand-stitched quilt in my arms. My gift to him, to them. I had sewn each panel from scraps of his childhood, his baby blanket, a piece from his graduation sash, even a torn sleeve from the hoodie he wore every day in middle school. And then she looked at me, my son's fiancée, Camille, and said calmly, like she was ordering a coffee, "After tomorrow, you won't be family." She stared at me with a kind of cold precision, the way a surgeon might study a tumor just before cutting it out. Except I was the tumor. I didn't reply. I couldn't. The words knocked the air clean out of my lungs. I remember the quilt slipping from my arms. I remember the concrete was damp. I remember the sound of laughter floating out from the rehearsal dinner behind us, my son's voice in it. I didn't cry. I just nodded and walked away. That night, I went home to an empty house. My cat didn't even greet me at the door. I turned off every light except the one above the kitchen sink and sat at the table, tracing the rim of my teacup like it could give me answers. My dress for the wedding was hanging on the bedroom door, pale blue. My son, Tommy, once told me that color made me look like spring. I didn't touch it. I didn't sleep. And the next morning, I stayed home. I let the neighbors leave in their suits and satin. I ignored the buzzing of my phone as text after text came in. "Where are you? You're running late, right? Your seat's reserved next to the cake table." I didn't respond because I wasn't going. She had said I wouldn't be family, and somehow I believed her. What happened next? I didn't expect. None of us did. By noon that day, the wedding had been called off. Everything collapsed, faster than anyone could have imagined. And the reason why? Well, that's the part no one saw coming. But before I tell you what happened after, maybe I should tell you what led up to it. Because people like Camille, they don't start with destruction. They start with charm, with polish, with just enough warmth to make you second-guess your own frostbite. They don't tell you outright that you're not wanted. They let you feel it, slowly, over time. Until one day, they finally say it out loud. And when they do, the silence you carry inside yourself suddenly makes sense. After tomorrow, you won't be family. That was the night before the wedding. I stayed home. But by the time the church bells rang, there was no wedding, and the truth behind why left every guest speechless. The morning after the wedding that never happened, the world was quiet, not peaceful, not gentle, just quiet in that aching, unnatural way, like the air itself didn't know what to say. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold before I even took a sip. The silence in the house was so complete that I could hear the faint ticking of the old wall clock. one of those ceramic ones, shaped like a cat with a swinging tail. It was the only thing moving. That and the sunlight. It slid through the window blinds in soft, slanted lines, landing directly across the dress I hadn't worn. Pale blue, with lace sleeves and a neckline just modest enough for a church wedding. I'd hung it on the closet door a week ago so the fabric could breathe. It looked out of place now, too bright for this room, too hopeful. Tommy had picked that color for me. We were at the thrift shop last winter, and he saw it buried in the back. He pulled it out and said, "This would look like spring on you, Mom." Spring. But all I felt was the stillness of winter. I stared at the dress until my eyes blurred. Then I looked away. My gaze settled on the quilt, still folded neatly on the arm of the sofa, untouched since last night. I hadn't had the heart to put it back in the closet yet. It was only 3/4 finished. Each square told a story, stitched not with perfection, but with love that knew its way around rough edges. His baby bib, a strip from his high school track jersey, a scrap of the curtain from his childhood bedroom, even one corner from the flannel pajama pants he wore until they fell apart in college. That quilt was my version of a memory book, but instead of pictures, it held fabric that had soaked in his laughter, his tears, his late-night study sessions, pieces of a life I had built $1 and one day at a time. I had planned to give it to them both, Tommy and Camille, as a wedding gift. Something to remind them of where he came from, something to wrap them up in on cold nights and hard mornings. But now I didn't know what to do with it. My fingers itched to finish the last few stitches, but something in me couldn't move, like the thread had snapped inside me too. I sat there a while longer, thinking, feeling. Then, out of nowhere, my mind wandered back, years back, to a morning not unlike this one. Quiet, still, just me, and a cup of tea that had also gone cold. The day after Mark died. He'd left for work that day with a thermos I packed, a kiss on my forehead, and a promise to fix the porch railing that weekend. By mid-morning, the phone rang. A scaffolding collapse. Immediate. Fatal. I remember Tommy standing in the hallway in his dinosaur pajamas, blinking at me as I dropped the phone. "Where's Daddy?" he asked, and I couldn't speak. I just knelt down, pulled him close, and held him as tight as I could. His small body trembled against mine, and I whispered, "It's just us now." And from that moment on, it really was. I took extra shifts at the hospice, canceled my own dentist appointments to afford his braces, learned how to make one chicken stretch 4 different meals. I kept the lights on. I kept the school forms signed. I kept going. And somehow, I raised a boy who became a man with a soft heart and strong convictions. But even strong hearts can be misled. Even kind boys can love the wrong people. I closed my eyes at the table, fingers tightening around the teacup. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed. A dog barked. Life moved on. And I sat there, surrounded by silence, a blue dress I never wore, and a quilt stitched with years Camille had never asked about. It hit me then that maybe I wasn't crying because Camille had rejected me. Maybe I was crying because Tommy hadn't stopped her. I didn't expect company that morning. Most people would already be at the church by now, parked, seated, fanning themselves politely with the paper program someone had probably laid out in neat little rows. But at 10:02 a.m., There was a knock on my front door. I knew it was her before I even got up. Dottie Harper, my next-door neighbor for 17 years, was the kind of woman who knew everything without ever asking. She was in her early 70s, short and sharp as a sewing pin, with perfect posture and a tongue like fresh-cut basil, aromatic, comforting, but with a bite when needed. When I opened the door, there she stood in her Sunday best. Pale lavender dress, matching hat, and a pearl necklace I knew she only wore for weddings or funerals. She looked me over with one raised eyebrow. "You're not dressed," she said. Not a question. "No," I replied. She adjusted the strap of her purse, glanced past me into the quiet of my living room, where the pale blue dress still hung untouched. Her eyes landed on the quilt folded on the couch. She didn't say anything about it. She didn't need to. "I wasn't sure," she said finally. "If you'd go." I stepped aside to let her in, but she shook her head. "I can't stay long. Just wanted to check in before I head over. Everyone's buzzing about your absence, of course. Tommy's been pacing outside the church. Looks like he's aged 10 years overnight." I nodded, lips pressed tight. Dottie didn't fill the silence with fluff. She never had. That's one of the things I liked about her. She looked me in the eye and said simply, "You're braver than most." That stopped me. I opened my mouth to deny it, to say I wasn't brave, just tired, just done pretending. But I didn't say any of that, because maybe bravery wasn't always loud. Maybe sometimes it just looked like staying home when every voice in your head told you to go. Dottie touched my arm gently, then leaned in and whispered, "They don't always know what they're doing, but you do. Don't let anyone shake that." And with that, she turned and walked down the steps in her low-heeled shoes, careful not to scuff them on the gravel. I closed the door and stood there a moment longer, hand resting on the knob. The house felt warmer somehow, though nothing had changed. I walked back into the kitchen, refilled the kettle, and reached for the teacup I hadn't touched since sunrise. As the water boiled, I moved slowly. Like every movement was something I had to earn. The spoon clinked softly against the ceramic, and I stirred without thinking. Then I stopped and held the cup up toward the window. The morning sun had shifted, casting its light through the glass in a way that made the tea glow amber. I watched the steam rise and curl, slow and steady. No rush, no urgency, just being. I let the silence wrap around me like the quilt on the couch. And for a long moment, I didn't think about Camille. I didn't think about the wedding, or the church, or the empty chair waiting for me in the front row. I just breathed. And in that stillness, I heard something I hadn't noticed before. Not from the outside, from within. A voice, my own, quiet but certain. "You made the right choice." And somehow, that was enough. Looking back now, I suppose the first warning sign came before Camille even said a word. It was the way she looked at my kitchen. Not with wonder, not with warmth, but with calculation, like she was mentally flipping through a catalog, trying to figure out what page I came from and whether it should be torn out. Tommy had brought her home for dinner that evening. I remember how nervous he was, pacing in front of the pantry like he'd misplaced his entire personality. "Mom, she's just amazing. You'll see," he kept saying, smoothing his hair every 3 minutes. I had made chicken pot pie from scratch, the way Tommy always liked it. Flaky crust, thyme from the little pot I kept on the windowsill, and enough filling to feed a football team. I even set the table with the good plates, the ones with the tiny blue flowers I only used for holidays. She arrived right on time. Perfect posture, designer bag, lipstick the color of a sunset you only see in magazines. And I'll admit it, she was stunning. She offered a polite smile, hugged me without touching me, and glanced around the house like she'd just walked into a memory she didn't want to belong to. "This is quaint," she said. Quaint. I swallowed that word like a bone, smiled anyway. Tommy was glowing. He pulled out her chair, poured her water, hung on her every word. And she was charming, funny even, talked about her work in digital branding, her yoga instructor, a recent trip to Santorini. When I asked if she wanted sweet tea or plain, she replied, "Oh, I don't drink anything with processed sugar." And then she caught herself. "But that's okay. You made it, right? I'll try a sip." She didn't. Not really. I served dinner and watched as she moved the food around her plate like she was performing surgery. She took 2 bites, small, quick, mechanical, and then folded her napkin across her lap as if to close the conversation. But what I remember most is what she didn't ask. She never asked about Tommy as a child. Never asked about what kind of boy he'd been. Never noticed the photo wall near the hallway, where his kindergarten art still hung crooked in mismatched frames. I brought up his spelling bee championship in the 5th grade. She blinked, smiled, and said, "Oh, I'm sure he's always been impressive." Then she turned the conversation back to herself, her work deadlines, her mentor's new podcast, her CrossFit routine. She talked like she was interviewing for a promotion I didn't know I was offering. Tommy didn't seem to notice. He kept glancing at her like she was light in human form. And maybe to him, she was. Maybe he needed something bright after all the years of gray I'd unintentionally given him. So I stayed quiet. That's what mothers do, right? We take the temperature of the room and decide whether to open the window or simply bear the heat. After she left that night, Tommy hugged me tighter than usual. "Thanks for trying," he whispered. I didn't know what he meant by that until much later. At the time, I told myself I was just being old-fashioned, set in my ways, resistant to change. But the truth is, my bones recognized something my brain was too polite to name. Camille didn't dislike me. She dismissed me, like I was background music in a room she hadn't decided whether to stay in yet. And that kind of quiet disregard is the sharpest kind of rejection. It cuts, but leaves no mark. Not right away, at least. If you want to know when something truly shifts in a relationship, don't look at the loud moments. Look at the birthday cake. Last year, Tommy turned 32. And like I had every single year before, I made his favorite, chocolate fudge cake with peanut butter frosting. The recipe was nothing fancy, just the one I'd clipped from a magazine in 1991 and modified over time until it became ours. Dense, rich, a little too sweet, just how he liked it when he was a boy. It was the kind of cake that stuck to the roof of your mouth and reminded you of childhood. I baked it the night before, frosting it in slow, even circles. I even piped the words myself. "Happy birthday, Tommy. Love, Mom." I added a little dinosaur candle in the corner, just for fun. Green with googly eyes. He'd loved dinosaurs growing up. I figured Camille would get the elegant gifts, the curated dinner, the polished toast. I could offer him nostalgia, something grounding. When I arrived at their apartment the next evening, Camille opened the door wearing black satin and holding a wine glass. The party was already buzzing. Low music, minimalist decor, soft lighting. A curated guest list of work friends, clients, and a few people I didn't recognize. I stepped inside, carrying the cake with both hands like it was a newborn. Camille saw it and blinked. "Oh," she said. "That's sweet." She led me to the kitchen, cleared a space on the marble island, and placed a gold foil cake box next to mine. "The one from the bakery has almond mousse and a chocolate glaze," she said, gesturing at it. "But I guess now we have options." She didn't sound angry. She didn't even sound sarcastic. Just neutral. A few minutes later, after dinner, I asked if it was time for cake. Camille smiled at the room, clinked her glass, and called for attention. Then, with perfect grace, she reached for the bakery cake. I stayed quiet. Tommy stood beside her, arm around her waist. He looked at the candles, then at me. "Did you bring yours, Mom?" Before I could answer, Camille interjected, smiling, always smiling. "She did, but you're on your new plan, remember?" She looked to me. "He's cutting refined sugar. Doctor's orders. But don't worry. I'll make sure he doesn't touch it." She laughed. The room chuckled with her. Tommy nodded quickly, still looking at me. "Thanks, Mom. You didn't have to go to all that trouble." But I saw it. The flicker in his eyes, the way his mouth tightened. Just a little, before he kissed Camille's cheek. I smiled. I always smile. Later, while everyone was drinking and laughing and sharing Instagram handles, I slipped into the kitchen and carefully wrapped my cake in foil. I didn't want to waste it. Didn't want to leave it there like an afterthought. No one noticed. No one stopped me. I brought it home, set it on my counter, and the next morning, I cut a slice for myself and ate it at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and no candles. It tasted the same, but I didn't. That cake used to mean celebration. Now it felt like a relic from a time when my efforts mattered more than appearances. It wasn't the sugar that hurt. It was the way she said it. "I'll make sure he doesn't touch it." As if I were a temptation he needed protection from. As if my love came with side effects. That night marked something I couldn't quite name at the time. Not rejection, not hostility, more like quiet erasure. The kind that doesn't scream, doesn't slam doors, just slowly rewrites the story until you're no longer in it. I always thought I'd be part of my son's wedding. Not the center, of course. Just present. Involved. A mother in the background, helping with the flower choices, offering an opinion on centerpieces, maybe getting teary-eyed at the cake tasting. The usual things, the human things. But Camille had a different idea. It started small. A text that didn't arrive. A date changed without telling me. A vendor booked before I'd even heard their names. At first, I told myself it was normal. They were busy. Young people planned weddings differently now, with spreadsheets and mood boards and group chats I wasn't part of. That's fine, I thought. They've got it under control. And then came the dress fitting. I'd bought a nice dress for myself, sure, but I'd imagined being there when Camille tried on hers. Just watching, even from the side, holding her coat while she spun in the mirror, sharing in that moment. If not as a mother-in-law, then at least as someone who helped raise the man she was marrying. But the fittings came and went. I only found out about them after Camille posted a photo online. Her in a sleek white gown, surrounded by friends in blush-tone dresses, champagne flutes, filtered lighting. I wasn't in the frame. Later, when I asked Tommy about it, he looked sheepish. "Oh, I thought Camille invited you. Maybe it was last minute." I nodded. Of course, last minute. Then came the food. Camille mentioned they were trying out caterers. I offered gently, "Let me know when the tasting is. I'd love to tag along, just for fun." She smiled. The way someone smiles when they don't want to say no, but absolutely will. "Oh, we're just keeping it tight," she said. "It's a lot of moving parts. But don't worry. We'll save you a plate at the wedding." Save me a plate. It wasn't unkind, but it wasn't inclusive either. I kept offering. She kept redirecting. I asked about the music. "Tommy used to love Sam Cooke. Maybe you could include a song?" She replied, "We're going more modern, but cute suggestion." I asked about the seating chart. "Just curious where I'll be sitting, so I know how dressed up to be." She responded with a laugh. "Somewhere nice, I'm sure. Just show up and look beautiful, okay?" That's when it settled. The truth. I wasn't being asked to help. I was being managed, decorated. I was no longer someone with a role. I was someone they were giving a role to, like a program detail. A pre-approved component that didn't require input, only compliance. They didn't want my stories, or my ideas, or my memories. They wanted my quiet attendance. And I'll admit, it stung more than I expected. Because for 32 years, I had been the person who planned everything. Birthday parties with paper hats and scavenger hunts, PTA potlucks, college packing checklists, doctor appointments, first job interviews. I was the one with the clipboard, the grocery list, the calendar reminders. And now, for the biggest day of his life, I was being told, "Just show up and look nice, okay?" Not cruelly, not even disrespectfully, just casually, like I was someone whose presence needed to be styled, not included. I smiled, of course. Smiled through all of it, because that's what mothers do. But inside, I began to feel like a guest in a life I had spent 3 decades building, and nothing prepares you for that. The quilt was heavier than I remembered, not in weight, but in meaning. I carried it with both hands, wrapped gently in tissue paper and ribbon, and tucked it into a brown paper bag with soft rope handles. It wasn't a gift bag, nothing that fancy, but it was enough. The rehearsal dinner was at a trendy bistro downtown. Brick walls, Edison bulbs, exposed beams painted white to look rustic. The kind of place where the menus didn't have prices, and the waitstaff called everyone my love. I'd parked 2 blocks away because the lot was full. My heels clicked quietly on the pavement as I approached the door. I took one breath, then another. Told myself I'd just drop it off, say congratulations, and leave early. No need to stay. I wasn't part of the planning. I wouldn't be part of the toast. But I thought maybe, just maybe, this gift would mean something. It was the only thing I'd made with both of them in mind. Each square stitched with a memory of Tommy's childhood, framed in calming grays and blues. On one patch, I had sewn the letter T. On the other, C. Together in the corner, a small heart, hand-stitched, a little crooked, but honest. I reached the door and paused. Through the glass, I saw Camille standing near the bar, a wine glass in hand, laughing. Perfect hair, perfect posture. A row of friends circled around her like petals. I opened the door, She noticed me instantly. Her face flickered, but only for a second, before the social smile returned. "Mrs. Langley," she said, gliding over. "How nice of you to stop by." I held out the bag. "I made this for you both. It's something special." She peeked inside, lifted the tissue, and saw the quilt. Her fingers brushed over the stitching briefly, then let the fabric fall. "Oh," she said. "How thoughtful." She didn't invite me in, didn't offer a drink, didn't introduce me to anyone. She simply stepped aside, guiding me back toward the entry like a gentle tide. And then she leaned in. Her voice dropped. Quiet, intentional. "After tomorrow," she said, "you won't be family." I blinked. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard or misunderstood, but her eyes didn't waver. They locked onto mine. Steady, cool, certain. She continued, "You've done your part, Mrs. Langley. You raised him. You got him this far. But he's a man now. He belongs to something new, and that doesn't include holding on to the past." I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She tilted her head slightly, that same polite smile frozen in place. "Don't take this the wrong way. It's better for everyone if you let go gracefully. Don't cling. Tommy doesn't need a mother anymore. He needs a wife, and I'm here now." I felt the bag slipping in my hand, but I didn't drop it. My fingers clutched tighter, even as my heart let go. She added one final note, almost like a benediction. "Just don't show up tomorrow, okay? It'll be easier." I turned, walked out, didn't say a word. The sky had darkened, but I didn't notice. The streets blurred. The headlights streaked past in soft ribbons. I climbed into my car, placed the quilt on the passenger seat like a child asleep, and drove. I don't remember the stoplights, don't remember the route, only the feeling of my hands gripping the wheel too hard, the sound of my breath echoing in the cabin, the taste of copper at the back of my tongue. I got home, parked, sat in the driveway for 10 minutes before realizing the car was still running. I turned it off, stepped inside. The house was dark, quiet. I placed the quilt on the arm of the couch, sat down beside it, and stared into the space where my family used to live. And that's when it hit me. She didn't say I wasn't welcome. She said I wasn't family. And somehow, that hurt more. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, the house so still I could hear the creak of the old wood settling under the weight of time and silence. The quilt rested on my lap like a sleeping child. I had folded it so carefully, the corners aligned, every stitch visible under the soft glow of the bedside lamp. My fingers traced the seams, as if trying to draw strength from each memory sewn into them. Tommy's baby clothes, his first-grade soccer jersey, a swatch from the shirt he wore to prom. That quilt wasn't just fabric. It was our story, mine and his. A quiet legacy only I had carried, thread by thread. And yet, now, I held it like a relic from a life I wasn't sure I still belonged to. I looked out the window. The moon was full, bathing the backyard in silver light. I used to watch Tommy play out there, his laughter echoing through the grass and trees. I remembered the way he used to run inside with scraped knees and bright eyes, yelling, "Mama, look what I found!" But now, the boy who once needed me for everything Had a bride who told me I'd served my purpose. I heard her voice again in my head. Clear, sharp, final. After tomorrow, you won't be family. Tommy won't need his mother anymore. You've done your part. What does a mother do with that? What does she do when her love, her sacrifice, her entire identity is reduced to a completed task? I closed my eyes, breathing slow. The quilt warmed my hands, but my chest felt hollow. I asked myself, should I still go? Should I show up tomorrow? Smile through it. Pretend none of this was said. It wasn't the first time I'd swallowed my pride for Tommy's sake. I'd done it when Camille ignored my cooking. I'd done it when she brushed past my stories of his childhood like they were trivia. I'd done it when she made decisions for the wedding and told me, with that rehearsed smile, just show up and look nice, okay? Maybe I could do it one more time, but something inside me whispered, at what cost? I wasn't angry, not yet. I was heartbroken. And somewhere in that quiet heartbreak came clarity. This wasn't about one wedding. It wasn't about a guest list or a dress code. It was about dignity, about being erased, gently but deliberately, from the story I had helped to build. I looked down at the quilt one last time, then slowly folded it back into the box. My hands moved slower than usual, not from age, but from the weight of what I was choosing. Not rage, not revenge, just release. As I closed the lid, I whispered, if I'm not family, I won't pretend to be. There was no bitterness in my voice, only a calm resolve. I stood up, turned off the light, and lay down, staring at the ceiling. The silence no longer scared me. It felt like peace, and for the first time in years, I didn't dream of being needed. I dreamt of being free. The morning sun poured into my kitchen, soft and golden, the kind of light that used to signal something joyful, holidays, birthdays, first days of school. But today, it felt quiet, not heavy, just quiet. I sat at the table with my hands wrapped around a cup of Earl Grey. The steam curled up into the morning air, vanishing before it could reach the window. My quilt sat in its box on the chair beside me. Still here, like me. The phone buzzed beside the teacup. Tommy. I didn't pick it up. The screen lit up again. Tommy. Where are you, Mom? Then, are you on your way? Camille says we need to start photos soon. A minute later, please text me back. Are you okay? I could see his face in my mind, already a little flushed with nerves, trying to smile while checking his phone again and again. I knew that face. I raised that face. My thumb hovered over the screen. I could respond. A short message. Something simple. I'm okay. Just staying home. Love you always. That would have been the kind thing to do, but I didn't type it. Instead, I turned the phone face down and reached for my tea. The ceramic mug was warm against my palms. My thumb pressed into the rim gently, the way I used to press down on his forehead when he had a fever as a boy. That small gesture had once held the power to calm him, to center him. Today, all I had was silence. I stared into the pale amber liquid, watching it ripple slightly from my touch. Then I pressed my fingertip harder into the rim, grounding myself, stopping the tears that had started to gather in the corners of my eyes. No, I wasn't going to cry. Not today. Outside, a bird sang, one lone song, and it made the quiet in my chest settle. Another buzz from the phone, then another. Still, I didn't answer. I knew what I was doing would hurt him. I didn't need anyone to tell me that. He might even look for me during the ceremony. He might keep glancing at the door, wondering if I'd appear at the back of the room, holding that quilt. But I wouldn't. I was here, sitting in the same chair where I used to cut the crusts off his sandwiches, the same chair where I once embroidered his name into a Christmas stocking, the same chair where I'd once fallen asleep after a double shift, waiting for his teenage self to come home safely. That chair had held decades of devotion, but this morning, it held stillness, a choice. I could have shown up and smiled for the photos. I could have handed over the quilt, taken my seat in the back row, and played the quiet role of the aging mother who still wanted a place at the table, even when she'd been quietly dismissed from it. But if I had done that, I would have been pretending that Camille's words hadn't landed like tiny blades, pretending that love meant always showing up, even when you're asked not to, pretending that I hadn't spent a lifetime already giving up pieces of myself just to stay close. No more pretending. It wasn't anger that held me in that chair. It wasn't pride either. It was peace, the kind that comes when you finally decide that your worth isn't up for debate, even by the people you love most. So I stayed. I drank my tea slowly, and when the phone buzzed again, one last time, I didn't pick it up. I had just rinsed out my teacup when I heard it. 3 sharp knocks on the front door. Unusual for a Saturday. More unusual on this Saturday. I opened the door, and there stood my sister, Margie. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her curls were half pinned, like she'd rushed out mid-preparation. And her eyes were wide, glassy. She was gripping her purse strap so tight, her knuckles had turned white. "Teresa," her voice cracked. "Margie?" I asked, stepping aside. "What's wrong? Are you—" She stepped in but didn't move further than the foyer. Her shoulders were trembling. She looked at me like she was about to say something she didn't want to be the one to say. Her chest rose and fell fast. Finally, she whispered, "The wedding's off." Silence. For a moment, I didn't react. My body didn't know how to react. I just stood there, my hand still resting on the edge of the door. Then I heard myself ask, "What happened?" Margie's lips pressed into a line. She glanced behind her, then back at me like she was making sure no one had followed her here. "It's Camille," she said. It happened so fast. People started whispering during the final touches. One of Tommy's friends, someone from his college days, I think, he pulled Tommy aside before the ceremony even started. I stepped away from the door, guiding her gently toward the kitchen table. She moved like her knees might give out. "What did he say?" I asked Ed. Margie sat down and exhaled shakily. "He showed Tommy pictures of Camille with someone else." My breath caught. "With who?" Margie winced. "Her boss. From the law firm. They've been together for months, apparently." I pulled out the chair beside her, but I didn't sit. I gripped the chair back instead. "They have proof?" She nodded. "Photos, screenshots, hotel timestamps, everything." My kitchen clock ticked too loudly in the silence that followed. "Teresa," Margie looked up at me again. It wasn't just a few flirty messages. There were pictures, intimate ones, and not just from before the engagement. Some were from last month, A weekend, Tommy thought she was at a retreat with her mom. I felt something shift in my chest. Not vindication, not relief, just a hollow kind of ache that ran cold. He called it off? I asked. Margie nodded. Right there, right before walking down the aisle. He stepped outside. She followed him, yelling, but he just said it loud and clear. We're done. In front of her parents, the pastor, everyone. I finally sat down, slowly, like my bones had turned to dust. And the guests? They were stunned. The room emptied like someone had pulled a fire alarm. Some of the groomsmen were crying. Camille's mother fainted. It was chaos. I stared at the table. Tommy didn't try to call me, I said softly. Not a question, just a fact floating between us. Margie hesitated. Maybe he didn't know what to say. I nodded. My fingers reached again for that teacup, though it was already rinsed and dry. Does he know you're here? No, she said quickly. I slipped away. I didn't want you to find out through someone else. You deserve to know. I looked at her, my older sister. She'd always been the soft one, the bridge in the family, always the one trying to fix things before they crumbled. And now here she was, standing in the wreckage with me. Thank you, I said quietly. She reached out and touched my hand. We didn't say anything for a long while. Then I whispered, mostly to myself. I told him love should be built on truth. Margie gave a weak smile. Seems like he just learned that lesson the hard way. I thought the worst had already been said, that the betrayal stopped at hotel rooms and secret texts. But Margie stayed seated at the table, fingers curling and uncurling around her teacup like there was more, like she hadn't yet released the full weight of what she carried. She looked up at me again. This time, her voice dropped lower. Teresa, there's something else. I nodded quietly. Margie took a breath. It wasn't just an affair. The wedding, the whole relationship. It wasn't just love gone sour. I didn't speak. She looked down, then back up with glassy eyes. Camille and her father, they drew up a prenup. I blinked. That's not unusual these days. She shook her head. No, Teresa. You don't understand. It wasn't a typical prenup. It was a trap. I leaned in slightly. The clause was buried deep. If Tommy and Camille divorced within 5 years, 60% of his assets, including anything passed down from you, would be transferred into a private company Camille and her father co-own. I froze. Margie continued, her words slow, heavy. Not even to Camille personally, but to their company. Everything would be absorbed. Investments, inheritance, real estate, even his stake in your late husband's old firm. The air around us thickened. My breathing slowed, but I didn't speak. She went on, quieter now. Tommy didn't know. He never saw it. Camille planned to show it to him just before signing the wedding license. She said it was just a formality, that it was something her father's lawyer insisted on. But it wasn't about protection. It was about acquisition. I didn't blink. My body was still, too still. She didn't love your son, Teresa, Margie said, her voice trembling now. She targeted him. There it was, the line that made everything click, that turned my stillness into something deeper than shock, something closer to recognition. Targeted. I had seen it. Not clearly, not in ways I could name, but in how Camille asked questions. What kind of stocks Tommy had, whether he'd ever thought about liquidating old assets. The way she laughed a little too hard when she heard about the trust fund his grandfather had left him. Back then, I told myself she was just curious. Young people talk about money differently these days. But deep down, I knew. And now Margie had just handed me the truth my heart had whispered all along. "How do you know all this?" I asked softly. Margie looked ashamed. One of the bridesmaids, Eliza, was helping Camille pack up things this morning. She found the folder. It wasn't even locked away. It was sitting out, like they never thought anyone would look. Eliza opened it. She's the one who brought it to me. I stood up slowly, walking to the kitchen window. The garden outside was still, untouched by this storm unraveling in my house. "She wanted the house," I said, more to the rosemary bush outside than to Margie. "She kept asking Tommy when I might downsize, told him it was too big for one person, that they could renovate it." Margie nodded. She wasn't planning a marriage. She was setting up an acquisition. Silence stretched again. I wasn't angry, not in the way people expected rage to look. I didn't slam a fist or cry out. I just stood there, letting the weight of quiet truth settle around me. "She underestimated him," I finally whispered. Margie looked puzzled. "She thought Tommy would sign anything with a smile if she wore the right dress," I said. "But he gets that from his father. Once he knows he's being used, he cuts the cord clean." Margie exhaled. "He did exactly that." I turned to her. "And now?" "He's gone." Took a bag and got into a car. Told no one where. I nodded. This wasn't over. But it had already begun long before the altar, and I had known it, deep in my bones. It was just after 1 a.m. when I heard the soft knock. 3 slow taps. Not rushed, not panicked, just hesitant. I wrapped my shawl tighter and moved quietly through the dark hallway. When I opened the door, there he was. Tommy. His face was drawn, eyes red-rimmed, lips cracked from the cold air. He didn't speak, just stood there, like a boy who had gotten lost on the way home. I stepped aside. He walked in, shoulders slumped, hands in the pockets of the same jacket he used to wear in college. No suitcase, no phone in sight. Only a folded envelope sticking out of his back pocket. I didn't ask. He sat down at the edge of the couch, that same green couch he once spilled orange juice on when he was 13. He stared at the floor. His shoes were still wet. "I drove," he finally said, voice hollow. "I don't even remember how far. I just kept driving." I sat in the chair across from him. Not close, not far, just enough. He took a breath, then let it out like it had been trapped in his lungs for hours. "She told you that?" he said slowly. "She said you're not family?" I didn't speak. I just nodded. That was all. No scolding, no judgment, no, "I told you so." Just a nod, a mother's nod. Tommy stared at the fireplace, unlit, cold. "She said you didn't fit the energy of the wedding, that you'd make her dad uncomfortable, that your house smelled old and poor, that I needed to think about our future." I closed my eyes for a moment, not out of pain, but something deeper. The ache of watching your child discover cruelty on his own, too late. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. "I knew she was tough. Ambitious. I like that. I thought she'd make me sharper, help me be more decisive, like Dad was. My throat tightened at the mention of his father. I thought she challenged me. I thought that was love. His voice cracked. She never once asked me about you. She never wanted to come here. I kept saying we could have a dinner, something simple. She'd say, "Why? There's nothing there for us." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. The living room lamp cast a soft glow over the side of his face. I feel so stupid. I got up, moved to the linen cabinet, and pulled out the old quilt. The blue one. The one I used to wrap him in when he'd get sick. When his fever spiked the night before his 5th birthday. When he broke his wrist in middle school. When his dog died. I draped it around his shoulders, gently. No words. He clutched it with both hands, gripping the fabric like a lifeline. Then, for the first time in 20 years, my son cried. Not a single tear, not a composed silence, but the kind of sobs that rack through the body, that shake a man from the inside out. I sat beside him, didn't say a word, just wrapped my arm around him like I used to, and let him collapse into me. He leaned his head on my shoulder, quilt gathered around his chest like armor and surrender at once. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered between sobs. "I should have never let her say those things. I should have never let her keep you away. I thought I was doing the right thing." I didn't say, "You weren't." I didn't say, "I told you." I only held him closer. Sometimes, a mother's silence can say everything. The kind that tells a son, "You were never unloved. You were only lost." After a while, his breathing slowed. The sobs turned into soft exhales. His fingers loosened their grip on the quilt. And in that quiet moment, I saw not a man, not a mistake, but my boy, coming home. By noon the next day, the war had begun, not in court, not in a lawyer's office, but online. Camille's Instagram lit up with a dramatic photo, her standing alone at the altar, mascara streaking down her cheeks, a bouquet clenched tight in her hand. Caption: My wedding day, destroyed. All because one woman couldn't let go of control. I never imagined my own mother-in-law would sabotage the happiest day of our lives. I begged her to stay away. She came anyway. Within minutes, her friends flooded the comments. "You deserve better, Queen." The audacity of some mothers. "You were so graceful in how you handled it. Proud of you." Then came the reposts. Then came the TikTok reactions. Then came the headlines. A viral blog titled, "Mother Ruins Son's Wedding Out of Jealousy." The article had no real facts, no names, just enough hints to stir the pot. They used phrases like anonymous source and insider close to the couple. My photo, cropped from a years-old Christmas picture, was splashed across the bottom with a thick red circle around my face. I sat at the kitchen table, the tablet screen glowing in front of me. The article had been shared over 9,000 times in under 2 hours. Tommy stood behind me, fists clenched. "This is insane. This is not what happened. She's making you out to be some kind of monster." His voice trembled with rage. "I should post something. I should tell the truth. I'll write a statement. No, a video. People need to know." I turned to him slowly, calm. No. His eyebrows shot up. No, Mom, they're crucifying you online. They think you ruined the wedding. I know what they think. He paused, unsure. I reached across the table, picked up the tablet, and turned off the screen. Perception is loud, I said, looking him straight in the eye. But truth walks quietly. He didn't respond. I continued. If you chase noise with more noise, you only feed the fire. Right now, she's screaming into a void filled with people who don't know either of us. Let her scream. His jaw clenched. But it's not fair. No, I agreed. It's not. But fairness doesn't trend. Outrage does. He sat down, the adrenaline draining from his face. I softened my voice. You remember when you were 7? And the boys at school spread a lie about you pushing someone on the playground? He nodded slowly. You were furious. Wanted to march into class and shout your truth. But your teacher told you something. Do you remember? He looked down, whispering, Let them talk. Keep being kind. The truth always settles in. I smiled. It took a week, but by the next Friday, those same boys were fighting among themselves, and the teacher saw everything. Tommy ran a hand through his hair. So you're saying just do nothing? I'm saying do the right thing, not the loud thing. He sighed, burying his face in his hands. Mom, I'm so sorry. I reached over and rested my hand on his. This isn't about me anymore. This is about the kind of man you want to be now that you see clearly. We sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the wind stirred the dried hydrangeas near the porch. The same ones I planted the year after his father died. They always held on, even through winter. I stood up. I'm going to make tea. Do you want the rosemary one you used to like? He nodded, a small smile peeking through. As I walked toward the kettle, the tablet buzzed with another headline notification. Daughter-in-law. Left at altar blames jealous Emil. Internet divided. Divided. That was a start. The kettle had barely cooled when Linda showed up. She didn't knock, just opened the back door like she always had, and walked in holding a folder thick enough to silence an army. Her gray curls were tighter than usual, glasses perched low on her nose. She dropped her oversized purse on the kitchen chair and gave me a look. You're calm, she said. Too calm for the storm brewing out there. I poured her tea. I've had years of practice. She pulled out the folder and slid it across the table to me. This, she said, is what calm people do when they get serious. Inside were printouts, screenshots, notarized copies, meticulously organized. I glanced at the top sheet. It was an email. From Camille Parsons to Robert Henderson, Regional Manager. Subject: about my promotion. Once I marry him, we'll be out of debt. He doesn't even read contracts, so getting him to sign off on the bonus clause won't be hard. I've waited too long for this reset. I'm not missing it. My hand didn't tremble. Not anymore. Linda tapped the table with her pen. That was sent 3 months before the engagement. I had a friend pull it. Don't ask how. I turned the page. A copy of the prenuptial agreement. It looked standard, until Linda highlighted one sentence. In the event of dissolution, Party A, Tommy, forfeits all claim to joint assets if infidelity or failure to provide is proven. Seems fair. I murmured. Linda smirked. It seems that way. But scroll down. She flipped to page 6. There, in small print, a clause that gave Camille the ability to define failure to provide without court arbitration. She could claim emotional neglect, missed anniversaries, or even not agreeing to buy her something, and he'd lose everything. It's a legal landmine. I took a long breath. And Tommy signed this? He did. Rushed. Didn't let anyone read it. She said it was just a formality. Linda leaned forward. This isn't just a toxic relationship, Teresa. This is premeditated financial predation. My stomach tightened, not with shock, but with the bitter taste of knowing I'd been right all along. I told him, I whispered. I told him something felt off. And now, Linda said, you have proof. Just then, Tommy walked in. He looked tired, older, like someone who'd lived 10 years in a week. Linda nodded at him. You ready to see what your bride-to-be had planned for your future? He gave a small, dry laugh. I've seen enough, but I'll see more if it means making this stop. I slid the folder to him. He read in silence. His face didn't twist, didn't fall, just grew still, too still. When he looked up, his voice was level. Can we use this? Linda sat back. You could sue, but lawsuits take time, money, and emotional stamina. And public court battles, well, you've seen what they do to people. Tommy nodded slowly. Then we don't go to court. He pulled out his phone and opened an app. What are you doing? I asked. There's a journalist I follow, independent, not part of the noise machine. Exposed a major university scam last year and helped get a wrongful conviction overturned. She doesn't care about clicks. She cares about facts. He typed something quickly, then looked at Linda. Can we scan this and send it securely? Linda smiled. Already ahead of you. I brought a drive. Give me 5 minutes. While she moved to set up in the den, Tommy stood still for a beat. I let her do this, he said quietly. I let her manipulate me because I thought being loved meant saying yes. I reached for his arm. Being loved should never feel like losing yourself. He blinked fast. Then he looked at me. I'm ready to speak. Not online, not loud, but clear. One truth at a time. And in that moment, I saw him. Not the boy who ran barefoot through sprinklers, not the man who bent under love too easily, but someone new, someone stepping out from the fire, not burned, but forged. The message came late. I was sitting by the window, cradling a mug that had long gone cold, watching dusk melt into the bones of the garden. The roses hadn't bloomed this season, not like they used to. I wondered, briefly, if flowers could feel grief. My phone buzzed. A name I didn't recognize, Janelle Whitaker. Underneath, just one line of preview. I debated sending this. I opened it. Hi, Mrs. Langford. You don't know me, but I used to be friends with Camille years ago. College, then a little while after graduation. I've been following what's happening, and I debated sending this, but something inside wouldn't let me stay silent. She always treated her own mother the same way. Cold, dismissive, like her mom was a burden instead of a blessing. I should have warned you when I saw your name in the engagement post. I should have said something. I'm sorry. I hope you're okay. Truly. I read it twice. Then again. My fingers hovered over the screen before locking it. I didn't reply. Not because I was ungrateful, but because that one message said more than any conversation ever could. Janelle wouldn't appear again. I knew that instinctively. Some people step into our story not to stay, but to pull back the curtain. I looked out into the gathering night and let my mind wander back to Camille's early visits to the house. I remembered how she'd tense when I asked about her family, how her smile thinned at the mention of her mother. "Oh, we're not close," she had said once. She was never really there for me. I'd nodded, politely. At the time, I didn't pry. I thought it was pain. I mistook coldness for hurt, silence for emotional distance. But maybe Janelle was right. Maybe Camille hadn't learned cruelty from neglect. Maybe she learned it from power. And maybe the only example of womanhood she'd ever respected was the one she built herself from jagged stone. I kept thinking about Janelle's choice of words, like her mom was a burden instead of a blessing. How many times had I heard Camille talk about people as transactions? She's harmless, but exhausting. He's nice, but not useful. She's lovely, too emotional though, hard to manage. She categorized people by their output, their value to her, their expiration. And all this time, I thought she'd see me as a mother-in-law, a mentor, a soft landing. But in her eyes, I had always been a tool, a vault, a name to leverage. And Tommy? He had been the gateway. I stood and placed the mug in the sink. My chest didn't hurt, not like it had before. Now, there was only a quiet ache. Not sorrow, not even anger, recognition. Janelle's message did something unexpected. It peeled back the label of villain and offered something even more dangerous: origin. Was Camille cruel because she was born that way? Or because no one ever stopped her? Because the women in her life either failed her or feared her? Because she had been raised in a house that mistook silence for grace and manipulation for strength? I didn't excuse her, but I understood her more than I wanted to. And that unsettled me, because if Camille was a product of warped values, then how many others were walking the same path? How many women my age had daughters-in-law who mimicked warmth but moved like sharks? How many sons were blind because no one ever taught them to tell charm from character? I picked up my journal and wrote down just one line. Some wounds don't bleed, they echo. Camille may have taken after someone, but I would not. I would not pass this echo forward. When Tommy returned from his walk that night, I showed him Janelle's message. He read it slowly, then set the phone down and nodded. "I believe it," he said. She used to mock her mom's useless old housecoat, said she'd never end up like her, waiting on a man's pension in a creaky home. I watched his face. There was no malice there, just the dawning of a perspective. "Maybe," he added, "she thought love was weakness." "Then," I said softly, "you'll have to show her she's wrong, by loving better, starting with yourself." He didn't speak, but he reached for my hand. When the invitation came, printed on heavy cream cardstock and hand-delivered by a concierge, I knew exactly what it was. A trap, wrapped in expensive paper. Camille's parents had requested a private dinner to find closure and possibly rebuild family trust. It would be hosted in a rooftop dining suite at one of the luxury hotels Tommy had once dreamed of owning shares in. I held the card in my hand, staring at the ornate calligraphy. Tommy hesitated. "Mom," You don't have to go. I turned to him and smiled. I'm not going for them, sweetheart. I'm going for you. That night, I wore the blue silk dress, the one I had bought decades ago when I thought there would be ballroom dances in my future. I never wore it, not to Daniel's charity galas, not to any Christmas party. I guess I was saving it for a moment when I needed to remember who I was. We arrived just before sunset. The air smelled of citrus and polished stone. Camille and her parents were already seated at a table set for 6, lit by low candlelight and surrounded by windows overlooking the city skyline. Camille stood when she saw us. Her makeup was subtle, hair pulled back into a low bun. She looked soft, apologetic, a performance she had rehearsed well. "Tommy," she said, voice trembling. "I didn't want things to be this way. I just want peace." Her father, Richard Beaumont, barely nodded at me. Her mother didn't even look my way. "I think we can all agree that emotions have been running high," Richard said, folding his napkin. "But airing dirty laundry to the press is below all of us." "Actually," I said gently, "no one from this table ever went to the press." "Not yet." Camille gave a little gasp. "You're still threatening us? After all this?" I didn't answer. Tommy sat stiff beside me, jaw clenched. Richard leaned forward. "Here's what's going to happen. You'll both retract whatever documents you leaked. And if you don't, our legal team will sue for defamation, harassment, and loss of consortium. My daughter has suffered emotional trauma. We have the psych records to prove it." I slowly reached into my bag and placed a slim manila folder on the table. "That's interesting," I said, my voice calm, "because I brought a few documents of my own." Camille's eyes flickered. I opened the folder. "Let's begin with this email." I slid it toward them. Sent from Camille's work email to her boss. 3 months before the engagement. It reads, "Once I marry him, we'll be out of debt by year 2. Camille's mother hissed. "That's taken out of context." "Oh, I agree," I said coolly. "So let's add context." I laid out the prenup. Clause 14. In the event of divorce within 5 years, 60% of all shared assets default to a holding company managed by Camille's father. That holding company is currently operating at a loss of $2.1 million. Richard went pale. "And this?" I slid out a photo, a grainy but clear image of Camille outside a hotel room, wrapped around a man who was not my son, time-stamped, 2 nights before the rehearsal dinner. Camille let out a soft sob. I didn't flinch. "You weren't marrying my son," I said, voice quiet but firm. "You were marrying his income projection." Silence fell like snowfall. No crash, just stillness. Tommy reached for my hand under the table. Richard finally spoke, his voice lower now. This isn't how respectable families settle things." "No," I said, standing. "Respectable families don't exploit one another for profit. They don't lie, manipulate, or discard people the moment they're inconvenient." Camille whispered, "You ruined everything." I turned to her, expression steady. "No, you did that yourself. I just turned on the lights." I left the folder on the table. Tommy followed, eyes full of something I hadn't seen in years, clarity. As the elevator doors closed behind us, I took a slow breath. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't just surviving, I was protecting. And that felt like justice. Camille's voice cut through the air like broken glass. You turned him against me. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I just stared at the water glass in front of me, watching the ripple from her outburst settle into stillness. We were still seated at the long table in the private dining room of the hotel, the one she had chosen, the one she had once imagined would host her wedding's champagne brunch. Now it was a battleground of shattered illusions. Across the table, her father sat pale and silent. Her mother reached for her hand, but Camille jerked it away. Tommy remained beside me, still, not touching me, not touching her, just watching. His jaw clenched once, then relaxed. And then, in a calm I didn't know he possessed, he rose to his feet. You did that all by yourself, he said. His voice was low, but final. Camille's face twisted. No, she's poisoned you. Ever since we got engaged, she's hated me. You know it, Tommy. She's jealous, controlling. You're just too blind to see it. He looked down at her. No anger, no pity either. Just acceptance. That's not true, he said. She stayed silent for years, hoping I'd see you clearly on my own. She didn't poison me. You did. Every time you lied, every time you used me as leverage for your ambitions, every time you treated her like she was disposable. Camille's eyes darted to me, wild and desperate. She's manipulating you. This is exactly what she wanted. I could feel the heat in the room shift. The tension had cracked, and I knew the moment had come. So I stood. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I smoothed the skirt of my soft blue dress, the one I'd never worn before, the one I'd bought years ago but kept hidden in the back of my closet, waiting for a reason. Tonight had given me one. I turned toward the door. Behind me, Camille's voice rose to a shriek. Don't walk away from me. Tommy, tell her to stop. Don't you dare walk away. I kept walking. My heels clicked softly against the marble floor, then stopped, because I heard him rise. I didn't need to look back. I knew it in my bones. He had chosen, not sides, but truth and self-respect. His footsteps followed mine, measured, steady. We didn't speak as we left the room, didn't look back as the door eased shut behind us. Just silence. And something else I hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. A quiet kind of justice. Not loud, not vindictive. Just clear. The elevator doors opened. We stepped in, still not speaking. As the doors closed, I looked at his reflection in the mirrored panel beside me. His eyes were red, but steady. You okay? I asked. He nodded. I think I am now. I reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. For a moment, we just stood there, holding on to something that had nearly been lost. When we reached the lobby, he glanced at me. I'm sorry it took me this long, he said. I smiled softly. It was right on time. Outside, the night air was cool, brushing against my face like the first breath after holding it too long. He opened the car door for me. And as we pulled away from that hotel, from that chapter, from that twisted illusion, I knew something deep in my core. Power isn't about control. It's not in yelling, or threats, or staged tears. It's in walking away when the battle is no longer worth fighting, and knowing you didn't lose. You simply chose peace. It started with a headline: Behind the Wedding Scandal, Financial Manipulation Exposed. A well-known investigative outlet had picked up the story, quietly at first. No clickbait, just cold, steady facts laid out like a quiet reckoning. Names weren't redacted. Documents were cited. Legal filings, bank transfers, emails from Camille's private planner, all of it surfaced. Apparently, someone had leaked the contents of the contract Camille tried to forge using the venue deposit and my hotel network. Someone who didn't like being part of a lie. Maybe the wedding planner had a conscience after all. Or maybe it was just someone who'd seen the look on my face when I walked away from that brunch. I don't know. And I don't need to. Because what followed was something I never expected. The comment section exploded, not with judgment, but with truth. Imagine raising your son alone, giving him everything, and being told you're not family. A mother paid for the roof above their heads, and they sold her seat at the table. Quilt over greed. I know which mother I'd want. The catering company, the hotel, the event, all her businesses. And they told her to stay home? Lord have mercy. At first, I didn't even realize what was happening. Tommy came into my home office one evening, holding his phone, his expression unreadable. "They're talking about you," he said. I froze. His voice softened. In a good way. He handed me the screen. My name, blurred for privacy but unmistakable, was everywhere. Screenshots of the wedding invite with the time and date blurred, next to business listings connected to my family trust. Users had connected the dots between my legal name, the hotel chain, the catering company, and the real story behind that infamous cancellation. One viral thread simply read, "Mother builds empire. Daughter-in-law says she's not welcome. Mother is the empire." I stared at that line for a long time. It didn't make me proud. It made me seen. For the first time in decades, I felt like someone had turned the lights on in a room I'd been living in with the curtains drawn. Tommy was pacing gently, unsure what to say. "She doesn't like it," he added after a beat. "Camille. She's blaming everyone. Me, the media, you, the planner, the venue manager, the reporter." I said nothing, because I didn't feel triumph. I felt something softer, relief, not for the vindication, but because I didn't have to defend myself anymore. The world had done it for me. I didn't post a statement, didn't hold a press conference. I didn't need to. The truth was doing just fine on its own. I watched as strangers defended me in ways my own family hadn't. This woman built her legacy quietly. They tried to erase her like she was furniture. Respect to the generation that didn't post their pain but lived through it anyway. Some people even found photos of my hotels, of the rose gardens, the community dinners we used to host, the scholarships I'd quietly funded in my late husband's name. They talked about the warmth of the staff, the handwritten welcome notes, the quiet class of it all. I stayed off social media for the most part. Tommy showed me the important pieces, but I kept my hands folded, my heart still. Some of my old neighbors dropped by with coffee. They'd seen the article and recognized the name. One of them brought over a bouquet of blush roses and said, "I always knew you had grace, Teresa, but this is a whole different strength." It wasn't until a week later that I allowed myself to cry, not because of the betrayal, but because the storm had passed. And I was still standing, not broken, just real. The rain had passed, both in the sky and in my chest. It was one of those golden afternoons where the light hit just right, angled and soft, like it had been filtered through memory. I sat on the porch with a warm cup of chamomile in my hands, the ceramic smooth and familiar against my fingers. The garden was breathing again. The roses, still recovering from last week's storm, stood tall with a quiet kind of defiance. Tommy sat beside me. No phones, no screens, just the rustling of leaves, the clink of his teaspoon, and the slow inhale of peace settling into old bones. He had brought lemon bars, said he made them himself. They were slightly overbaked on the edges, but the middle was soft and sweet. I took a bite and chuckled. "A little dry," I teased gently. He smirked. "It's the effort that counts, right?" I nodded, sipping my tea. "Always." We sat like that for a while. The kind of silence that isn't awkward but restful, like exhaling after holding your breath too long. Then, in the stillness, Tommy spoke. His voice was low, almost apologetic. "I almost married someone who erased you." I didn't move, didn't flinch, just let the wind carry his words into the space between us. He was staring down into his tea, fingers tracing the rim of the cup like it held more answers than it did warmth. I let her shape the story, made excuses. I told myself you were old-fashioned, that you wouldn't understand her vision, her family, her version of life. And I think I wanted to be part of her world so badly that I ignored the fact that it required me to leave mine behind. I looked at him then, at the boy I had raised, and the man who had nearly lost his mother, not to death, but to silence. He turned to me, eyes a little red. "I'm sorry, Mom." I reached over, placed my hand over his. Not tight, not dramatic, just steady. "You found your way home," I said quietly. "That's all that matters." His shoulders dropped as though he'd been carrying those words, waiting for permission to let them go. I continued. "We all take detours, Tommy, sometimes through people, sometimes through pain. But life has a funny way of circling us back when we're ready." He smiled a little at that. "A real one." "I saw the photos of your community dinners," he said. "The ones with Dad handing out those little cards. What were they?" "Kindness cards," I said, laughing softly. He believed everyone needed something kind in their wallet. I didn't know about any of that. "No," I replied, "because I wasn't raising you to know my resume. I was raising you to know how to love." He looked away again, blinking hard. "I wish I'd seen it sooner." "You saw it when it counted," I said, "and that's more than most people get." We went quiet again, watching a pair of squirrels chase each other across the fence line. One of them paused and stared at us, as if confused that we weren't arguing, not raising voices like so many others do. Just two people on a porch, one mending, one forgiving. "I moved my things out," he said eventually. "From her place. Officially. I didn't ask for details. Didn't need to." "I'm proud of you," I said instead. He nodded, and then, with a sheepish grin, "Still figuring out how to make the lemon bars less like concrete." I laughed, a deep, honest sound that vibrated through my ribs. "Maybe try reading the full recipe next time." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the grass. The air smelled of earth and cinnamon. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. There were no contracts to review, no voices raised behind closed doors, no secrets hanging in the air, just tea, just Tommy, and a gentle kind of stillness I didn't know I had missed until it returned. The next morning, the house was quiet in that sacred way it only is when grief has turned into understanding. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across the floorboards. I stood in the sewing room, what had once been the guest room, then storage, then forgotten. Now, it smelled faintly of lavender and linen. Tommy appeared in the doorway, holding 2 steaming mugs. He handed me mine without a word, then glanced toward the table where the unfinished quilt lay waiting, soft folds of fabric spilling like time itself. He didn't sit right away, just stood there a moment, eyes scanning the pieces. Then softly, with a voice both new and familiar, he said, "Let's finish it." My breath caught. He remembered. I set the mug down slowly and pulled out the old wooden stool across from him. The fabric felt different in my hands this time. Not heavy with sadness, but light with purpose. We took our places across from each other, the way my mother and I once had. The quilt sat between us like a map of memories. I watched as Tommy reached for the faded blue square, the one made from one of his childhood pajamas, and began to stitch. His fingers fumbled at first. "Still terrible at this," he muttered. "You're doing just fine," I smiled, threading my needle. "It's not about perfection." It was quiet work, but the best kind. His shoulders moved with more ease now, each pull of thread like a tiny undoing of all that had frayed between us. And in between the rustle of fabric and the hum of our sewing machine, I felt something settle in my chest. Peace. The kind you only earn by walking through the storm and deciding to build something new on the other side. As we worked, we talked. Not about the past, not about the money, not even about her. Instead, we remembered small things. How his father once stitched the crooked star in the top corner because we ran out of navy fabric. How Tommy used to sneak cookies into the sewing basket and blame the dog. How this quilt had been started to celebrate his wedding, and somehow, in its incompletion, became a memorial to something more lasting. He looked up at me halfway through a square. "I thought this was a gift for someone else." I nodded. It was. Then it became a gift for us. His expression softened. I never noticed how each square tells a story. I reached for the final patch, a soft, faded floral I'd saved for last. It was from the dress I wore the day he graduated from high school. The sleeves had frayed long ago, but the bodice had remained untouched, folded neatly among the fabrics I couldn't bear to throw away. Tommy held it carefully as I pinned it down. "You kept this?" I smiled. "Some things are worth saving, even when they don't fit anymore." He nodded slowly, and for a moment, I saw the little boy again. The one who used to drag his blanket around the kitchen and beg for more peanut butter on his toast. As he finished the final stitches, I reached into the drawer and pulled out a tiny square of blank muslin. The label square. It was tradition. Every quilt I'd ever made had one. It held a name, a date, and one line that meant something. Only this time, the words hadn't come until now. I threaded a needle with dark plum thread and began to embroider, my fingers moving carefully, lovingly. I didn't tell him what I was stitching, just worked quietly as he folded the rest of the quilt in his lap. When I finished, I held it up for him to read. His eyes scanned the stitched letters, and he read aloud. Family is the one that stays when others leave. He didn't speak right away, but his hand found mine. And in that small act, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a different kind of family, one patched together not by obligation, but by choice, by forgiveness, by the silent promise that we would keep showing up, even when it was hard, especially then. He folded the quilt and placed it gently in the cedar chest beneath the window. And as the sun climbed higher, casting its light across the old wood floor, I understood. Some stories are meant to unravel, so we can stitch something stronger in their place. Tommy hung the quilt on the wall of his new office, centered, well-lit, and commanding attention without asking for it. The threads caught the morning sun in soft reflections, each square stitched with care, patience, and years of quiet survival. It didn't belong in a gallery or a museum. It belonged here, where decisions were made that would change people's lives, where justice was spoken softly but carried weight. It had taken him days to decide, not whether to hang it, that was always a given, but where. Every square had a story, a thread of pain sewn beside a line of strength. And in the bottom right corner, where his eyes always drifted when he paused mid-work, was the line she had stitched in calm defiance. Family is the one that stays when others leave. He had seen clients glance up at it with curiosity before. Some tilted their heads. Others smiled. No one ever asked. Until today. A woman sat across from him, quiet but tired. She looked like she'd been holding her breath for years, the kind of woman who signed the wrong documents because she'd been told to trust the wrong people. When she entered his office earlier, her eyes had gone straight to the quilt, then lingered. Now, as they were wrapping up the paperwork that would help her reclaim her late father's land from a nephew who had forged his signature, she asked softly, "That's beautiful. Who made it?" Tommy paused. He could have said, "My mom." But it didn't feel like enough. He leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting to the quilt, and then back to her. "My mother," he said. "She's the reason I protect people." The woman looked at him, her eyes warming. She didn't press for more, didn't pry. But something shifted in the room. A silent thread connected them. Not just lawyer and client, but children of women who had held families together with bare hands and unconditional patience. He walked her out a few minutes later. As the door clicked behind her, Tommy turned back toward the quilt. Every square of that piece told a story not just of their family, but of a quiet evolution, of betrayal that burned and love that outlasted it, of a woman who had been told she wasn't welcome at her own son's wedding, and chose instead to become the place he would always return to. He remembered the last night they worked on it together, her fingers guiding his through unfamiliar motions. He'd teased her about her stitches being crooked, and she'd replied, "Life doesn't always sew straight lines, but it still holds." It was his anchor now. Not just memory, but reminder. Reminders that people will try to reduce family into guest lists and legal titles. Reminders that wealth isn't always counted in assets, but sometimes in who holds your hand when the world burns. Reminders that strength can be silent, that forgiveness can coexist with boundaries, that the thread that binds isn't always blood, but belief. As the day wore on, more clients came and went. Each noticed the quilt, and some asked. Each time, Tommy answered with a simple line. My mother made it. That's why I do what I do. And with every telling, something softened in him. Not grief, but clarity. She didn't need an inheritance to make an impact. She didn't need applause or a front row seat at a wedding. She had something far greater, a legacy stitched from silence, survived storms, and a love that stood still even when the rest of the world turned away. And now, it lived here, quietly commanding, softly powerful, just like her. I still sit by the window most mornings, the same one where I used to wait for letters, for phone calls, for apologies that never came. But I no longer wait. I simply watch. The roses outside have started blooming again. Funny how they do that, even after being cut back harshly, almost as if they know the quiet is where the healing begins. There was a time I thought I had to earn love, to buy it with casseroles, free babysitting, holiday checks, to prove my worth by shrinking myself down into whatever shape fit their expectations. But all that time, I forgot something important. I forgot I was enough. The day Tommy came back and called me Mom without flinching, something loosened in my chest. He didn't come bearing excuses or explanations, just a quiet presence, a pair of hands that remembered how to hold mine, a pair of eyes that finally saw. It's strange how healing works, not as a flash of light, but as a slow turning of the soil. Not loud, not proud, just steady. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need the guests at that wedding to know who paid for the candles, or the venue, or the napkins. I didn't need to shout. I just needed to reclaim my peace. Sometimes, silence isn't weakness. It's strength choosing not to scream. I never told Tommy how badly it hurt, how I stared at the RSVP card I never received, how I folded my hands in my lap that night and listened to the silence echo through the house where his baby pictures still hung. I never told him about the tears on my pillow or the whisper I said to myself, "You raised a good boy. He's just lost right now." And he was. But even the lost ones find their way home, if you leave the light on and the door unlocked. They told me I wasn't family, that I didn't fit their image, that I was too old, too small, too quiet. But I never needed their permission to love my son. I loved him through every silence, through every sharp word, through every absence. I loved him even when I didn't recognize the man he had become, because I remembered the boy, the one who once tucked his head under my chin and cried about a broken toy, the one who brought me dandelions from the yard and called them roses, the one who believed once that I could fix anything. And maybe I did. Maybe not all at once. Maybe not in the way he expected. But I fixed what mattered. Not the wedding, not the betrayal, but the bond between us. He found his way home. That's enough. Now, I live slower. I drink my tea before it goes cold. I read books I never had time for. I talk to the neighbors' kids and let them help me in the garden. They ask about the quilt, and I tell them, it's stitched from stories. And they nod like they understand. I keep the door open most days. Not for them, for him. Just in case he needs a place to sit, to rest, to remember. He doesn't need to explain. He never did. Because forgiveness isn't a grand declaration. It's a quiet release. And love, real love, doesn't demand to be acknowledged. It simply stays, like a steady breath. Like the warmth of sun on your skin after a long winter. That's what I carry now. Not the pain, not the memory of being left off a list, but the echo of a voice that once called me mom again. And the knowing that I didn't lose my family. I chose to love, and that was enough.